of writing good assignments and packaging them all up, and then the mapping that went along with it. We've touched on that quite a bit. And it's a little bit disjointed because we are going to be doing a lot of this in person on the weekend. So this is kind of prep for that in many ways. But today what I'm going to be talking about is managing large data sets and some of the steps involved in a large incident and getting it up and running properly. And you should be able to see that okay. I'm going to start by talking about something that's just a little bit removed from this flow, but it's about efficient team deployment. We finished writing all of our assignments. How do we get everyone in the field efficiently? We've all been to searches where that's a disaster and you have one person trying to get 100 people out in the field and it never really works. I'm going to talk briefly about tracking teams in the field, but you guys know that pretty well already. But for those who haven't used this a lot for real-time tracking, I just want to touch on the different systems you can use to do that. I want to talk about working with tracks, how to import them, how to name them, and how to clean them up. And I'm going to email you some tracks that you can kind of practice on at home after I demo how to do them. And then I'm going to spend a fair amount of time talking about working with map settings to efficiently manage large data sets. So I'm going to have a really giant search that was a real search. And I'm going to kind of show you the actual data we had at that search, which was pretty messy, and how you can really clean it up and organize it efficiently and be a lot better in the planning and operations functions when you do that. So with that, let's first talk about what we call the crush. If we were in person tonight, we'd actually run an exercise on this, which is pretty interesting. But I think one of the things management teams really struggle with is efficiently deploying a large number of searchers in a short period of time. And the campfire was the mother of all deployments. And we really wrestled. Matt and I were both in plans the first few days there and operations. And how do you really get that done efficiently? And over the years, we've kind of come up with some best practices. You don't have to do it this way, but we found that this leads to a process where the main briefing gets done and then you're calling names and people are rolling out of the lot really fast. And that is a really good morale booster for people because they know they're being managed well and they know their time's not being wasted. So how do you really accomplish that? So what we recommend is that you get your sign-in sheets and your T cards all set up with typing. And then the key thing, especially on a mutual aid search, is having agency reps up there in the front of the command post, identified clearly with the T cards, hopefully of their team, or at least a sheet with all their personnel for their team. And while Mike St. John's out there giving the general briefing, we're going to get all of the people that are available and free within the planning and operations group together with those agency liaisons. And we're going to try to match the teams up to assignments. So essentially, it's an all hands on deck behind the scenes effort, and it works really well. Since we all kind of know what's going to be in the briefing anyway, it's really important for obviously the people coming in to get a good briefing, but we're kind of up on that already. So we can stay behind the scenes, keep an ear out for that while we're building all the teams. And just like the good ICS rules go, one briefer to 4 to 5 teams. We've all been to searches where you have one ops chief briefing all the teams going out and there's 20 teams waiting. There's no chance that the 15th through 20th teams are going to get out in a reasonable amount of time. So the ops chief is responsible for supervising the deployment of these teams, but mix in all the ops plans, logistics, people that are skilled at this and familiar with the assignments or the search for that day, bring them all in and put them to work. And then 104 copies go to the teams, the 104 summary, ops, plans, and comms. And then I want to digress for a moment and talk about what happens if you have a really large search with divisions and groups. Our best practice is, let's say you have an 8 o'clock briefing and dogs are going out at 7. At 6:30, make it known ahead of time that you want all the identified division supervisors or group supervisors to be at the command post with the overhead team. And you're going to go through a pre-briefing with them. You're going to tell them what their assignment for their divisions are going to be for that day. And you're going to kind of let them build their own assignments within those divisions. And that gives them more time to think about what they want to do. But well before the briefing, they're going to have a good idea of what their workload is going to be for that day. And then once the main briefing's over at 8:15 or whatever, they can pull their team, their division together And by then they know what they're going to do. They're not walking into it cold and just getting handed those division assignments at 8:15. So this is a really good best practice. We did it at a number of larger incidents, and it seems to really help things. Any questions on that so far? Okay. Another thing in building teams, and this is something we like to talk about a lot, is really thinking about matching your skills to your assignments, right? You're going to have identified in your plan your type 1 searches, your hardest assignments, local knowledge. Do I need experienced flankers on more really experienced flankers? Do I have them here? Can I allocate them to canine teams? I want strong team leaders. So once again, your agency liaisons are going to be key for that. Who are your best team leaders? Give me your 4 best team leaders. Find out who has local knowledge. There might be fire people or other folks associated with the search. And if you're comfortable with the skill levels needed in the search, embed those local people in teams where it's going to really be helpful. Navigational skills, make sure you have that. Make sure you have, especially on remote teams, very strong medical person on each team. And if you can identify working EMTs or better, or nurses, or people like that, those are very valuable in remote searches. So let's make sure we make the best use of putting them in places where they could really help in an IWI type situation. There's always a lot of talk about county teams versus rainbow teams. By rainbow team, I mean a team mixed of 4 different counties or something. That can be really difficult. It can be good for team building, but it can be really difficult because no one really knows the other person's skills, and one person's going to be put in charge, and everybody does things a little differently. So even though it's a good learning experience, I think especially in more dangerous searches and more remote searches, it's a really good idea to try to keep people that are used to working together. A secondary benefit of that is transportation, right? On the first day of the campfire, Matt and I made a colossal mistake of splitting up some teams between different counties. So you'd have like some Marin and some Bamaru and then all of a sudden they got their assignments and they're heading out and they're like, well, which vehicles are we going to use? Because you've split up our teams now, and who gets the vehicles? And it became a gigantic fire drill essentially to figure out how to allocate vehicles and such. So the more clean you can keep the team setups, the better. They already know how to work together and they know each other's capabilities. So I'm kind of a fan of that overall. And I started out years ago trying to mix teams a little more, but I do that as a last resort now. And then carefully evaluate team sizes. Smallest teams possible gives you the maximum available spread. And then, with assignments, I kind of like redeploying teams regularly too out there, so keep the assignments reasonable size. And then you have maximum flexibility for covering the key stuff you want to do in that day. So just to recap that, I think, you get the T cards together, the agency reps, you pull out your 104 deployment summary, you see how many people you have in to match up against your higher priority assignments and medium priority assignments. You figure that all out and you just jot it all down and start breaking it out and get everybody out on the road as quickly as possible. And then, assuming on a big search like this, you would have 5 or 6 or 7 briefers. They would already know which assignments they're going to be handing out. You'd make sure they all understand what's going on in each of those assignments if they weren't involved in writing them or reviewing them. And then hopefully it all goes out pretty smoothly. And we try to use this technique on all of our searches now. And it's really, I think, sped up our ability to get people out quickly. I mean, a lot of searches, 20 to 30 minutes, will have pretty large deployments done. And sometimes we'll screw things up still and it'll be 45 minutes, but you certainly don't want the old hour and a half or 2 hour kind of thing anymore. So hopefully those will help you kind of work. And here's once again, the campfire where we broke things into groups, and those are the assignments for the supervisors. And, we talk about use sticky notes, whatever we had to get things set up. And then we start pulling T cards and get it all organized and get the 300 or 400 people out there as efficiently as possible. Okay, enough on that. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do that deployment exercise. And I don't think we'll have time on the weekend, but it is pretty interesting when we give the teams a bunch of T cards and say, you figure out really quickly how to build the teams that match up to these assignments. So it's a good exercise, and it's a sorely needed skill that we all have to work on. And hopefully those tips will help you a little bit. With respect to real-time tracking, I just wanted to touch on this briefly. Nevada County is kind of a leader in that anyway, so this won't be new to you. But there are, these 4 different ways really to do real-time tracking in SARTopo, and I just want to make sure for those that aren't aware that when we bring in National Guard with Shout Nano devices, which are essentially the military version of inReaches, they will come into any search you want them to come to, and they'll bring a full a complement of personnel as well to check them in and check them out and instruct people on how to use them. One thing we learned is they kind of assume that we know how to use nanos, and sometimes they'll send people out in the field assuming they know how to use them. And we've had a couple of searches where people come back and they didn't even know it was a messaging device. They just thought it was a GPS kind of thing, a tracking device. So it's really important to make sure when you do use these devices in mutual aid environments that all the teams get briefed on the capabilities of the devices. inReaches, I think you all know about, two-way messaging. If they're on a team account in SARTopo, as we do in Marin, then all of those devices will be available within SARTopo, as you see right here. Fleet Sync radios, Nevada County was the pioneer, I believe, of this process of getting your high band radios hooked up into SARTopo. And then finally, obviously the SARTopo mobile app. Interesting side story, we were doing a recruiting thing last night. We had around 50 to 60 potential new recruits in, and we did a full-scale evidence search using just-in-time mobile app training, and they totally nailed it. I mean, everybody got it. It worked great. They went out and tagged evidence, and it was smooth as silk. So it's a great example of why you can use law enforcement, fire, other people that are there who may be embedded into teams. Don't be afraid of trying to teach them how to use that app quickly and making it accessible to them, and get them out there recording tracks and marking data as well in the field. So that's all I want to mention on that sort of thing.
I do want to back up. I want to hit on that for a moment.
Okay.
Just for everyone's awareness, our plan over maybe the next 2 months is to sort of change this somewhat significantly, because we see lots of confusion. And I think Nevada County has asked for basically permanent tracking of the Fleet Sync radios, whereas right now you could say a little bit of a track tail and the radio moves and the track tail disappears. So right now we have, for team accounts, we have an account level shared location feature that you can add inReaches or set up Fleet Sync tracking for. And then we also have locators on a map that you can do the same thing for. And just for everyone's awareness, probably in the 2 month or so range, we're moving towards everything that's in these shared locations on the account is a dot on the map, and everything that's the locator group on the map is a permanent track that never resets. And you'll be able to use either. You could feed an inReach or Fleet Sync to either one, but that'll become a stronger split so that hopefully it's more clear to people how they work.
Thanks for that, Matt. Okay, so if you happen to go old school and take your Garmin out in the field, ironically, once again, this is a Nevada County contribution. There are 3 import methods here for old school GPSs, and you will see those a lot even in searches with good cell coverage, because the carded dog collars, for instance, and carded folks like to use them a lot. So, and a lot of teams still like to prefer to use a plain old Garmin. So there are 3 ways. There's a Chrome or Safari GPS.io plugin, which was written by Tom Grundy, I believe. It has really nice filters for importing. It's kind of a messy IT level one-time installation, but once you do that, say on your team computers, that's a viable plugin that can be used to import tracks from a GPS. But with Garmin 60s and later, should say 60, not 62, right? No, 62 plus. Or is it 60s? I can't remember.
62 plus. The gray 60s don't USB mount.
The 60s do not. So the 62s, which have been around for 6 or 7 years now, are pretty much the standard anyway. If you plug those in, they become just essentially a thumb drive. You can navigate to the GPX folder, and then you can import your tracks. If none of that works, you can use an intermediate program like Garmin Basecamp or Easy GPS. They're both free. You can install that on your team accounts, and then you can import all the tracks to that app. Then you could export them out and then import them into CalTopo. I've almost never needed to do that. The direct import ways usually work fine. So one of the things you do when you do import, though, is you'll see on the map, and I'm sorry I don't have a picture of it right here, but you'll see on the map that there's a pretty cool filter that kind of shows you how far the track is from your current map view. And that makes it real easy to tell if it's a track from too long ago or a track from too far away and so forth. So I suspect most of you know how to do this. I've got a slide later on this, but it's really important to have good people in your debrief section uploading tracks and tagging them correctly. We use a short name on import, like team 101 would get 101A, 101B, and so forth. The reason we do that is we want to know which team put the track on the map. And we also want to keep this label short in the event that we do display the labels on the map. You don't have 15 characters strung out across the net. Let's talk for a minute about, and there's a PDF that I put together in the student materials that you'll get that kind of has detailed instructions on all of these processes if you're not familiar with them. What I want to do now is talk about bad tracks. And this is a skill that's also in short supply on most teams, but especially as you get to larger searches and you get 50 GPSs dumped on your desk in the command post at the end of the day, and you're trying to finalize your plans for the next day. If you have a bunch of garbage data in there, it can make a really difficult time of your planning effort. And the bad data can be things like just bad waypoints on a GPS, especially in snow and granite. Sometimes you get reflections of signals that are kind of throw a data point off here or there. But the more common thing you see is people leaving them on when they're driving around, like this red track up here, that's a road. They're driving back and forth to the command post, which is on the west here, and they're leaving their GPS on the whole time. The other thing they'll do is go back to the command post. They'll still have tracks recording. They'll turn the GPS back on, and it'll start putting points there. And then those points connect as a straight line all the way back to the search area and all. So what you really want to do is get from something like this, which is a cluttered view and gets really, really bad on a big search, to something like this, where I'm only looking at the things that I'm going to use to make my decisions about how to plan my search going forward and how to analyze what's been done. So with that, I want to skip over back to a SARTopo screen real quick here. Give me a second, and I'm going to switch screens. And let's go here. By the way, if you haven't used the real-time fire stuff, here's a great example, unfortunately, but of our two fires going today. If you haven't seen this, it's amazing. So this satellite imagery is not super high resolution, but it's updated like every 10 minutes roughly, if I remember right. And it's real time, which is awesome. Down here, same thing goes for the red squares being real-time fire activity, heat signatures down here. And this is an invaluable tool as we get into fire season. So highly recommend that you experiment with some of that, especially now that we have incidents that you can look at using that tool. But I'm going to go over here now and back to talking about these tracks. Everyone sees that okay, I assume? Resolution's okay? Okay, so I have a bunch of tracks here that I've just imported, and I made them a little different colors and things for visibility. You can see I've already broken the rule up here by having really bad names. So one of the first things I would do is make sure that I rename them on import. But if I didn't do that, I would go up here and hopefully have enough information to rename those to something that's correct. Like in this case, I'm going to go team 805A or something like that. I can rename that, and then I'll have a good archive of that. I'll know which operational period that's going to go into and so forth and so on. But let's take a look at the bad data I've got in this search. I've got points that go off to infinity here. I've got people driving on roads, and I've got people driving on roads up here when they're really supposed to be searching in here. Some of that's unavoidable, but if you get people who are pretty skilled at that on your team, you should actually have 2 or 3 ideally. So at least you have 1 at a search. There are some tricks here that I want to kind of demo about how you clean up these tracks. And it depends on what they look like. So what I'm going to do is start with kind of the low hanging fruit here. Like I've got a bad line here that I know has nothing to do with search. If I go down to this with my little finger and I left click on that, I can select edit, and it's going to show me all the points that are associated with that track. You can see up here where I'm at the command post hanging out. I'm driving around up the road. And then finally I park my truck and then I go out and do some searching around here. And then I drive back with my GPS still turned on. So I've got like more bad data than good data here. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to get rid of the low hanging fruit, which is this wacko data point out here. And this would also be the case if you had a nice smooth track on a search and then you had one data point like a half mile away and then a nice smooth track again. It just got one spurious data point. But the idea is you want to delete that point. So I'm going to go up here with my little pointer. I'm going to click on that dot, right click, sorry. And I'm going to get the option that says delete vertex. So if I click on that, it's going to delete that point. And as soon as I delete that point, now I've gone back and solved that immediate problem. So I'm going to save that one. It doesn't clean up my road tracks yet, but I'm going to click on this again. I'm going to edit. And then I'm going to go right click on this and delete vertex. So I've gotten rid of some of the mess here and clutter on my map, but I haven't really solved the road problem yet. And now I've lost my map, so I can go up here and click on it again, and it'll center on there. So I see a couple of problems here. I'm going to start now by cleaning up this red. Yeah, let's do that one first. So my basic issue here is that I've sent a team up here to search this area, and you can see they did a pretty good job in here. And there's another team up in there as well. Actually, it might have been the same team mislabeled. But what they did is if I zoom in far enough, I'm going to see that this red track drove all the way up there with their track recording on, did their search, got back in their truck right here. You can kind of see where there's a bunch of points here. So that's where they parked. They can figure that out. And then there's two lines going in and out of there where they drove back to the command post. I want to get rid of that stuff. So I'm going to do a little surgery here. I'm going to zoom in. And I see that I've got these two red lines I want to get rid of going back to the command post, right? So I'm going to go to this one on the left, and I'll do it a little further away just for clarity here. I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to get an option map that says, oops, sorry, right there. I'm right, I got a left click on that, sorry. I left clicked on that, and there's a modify menu, and I click to expand that. I'm going to say split here. And that's going to split that track into two pieces, and it doesn't damage anything. Then I'm going to go to the one right next to it that's also the red line that I want to get rid of. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to right click on that. It's the old way. Left click on it. Modify. Split here. Okay. So now, in theory, I can go delete the parts that's driving on the road and save the part that's the real search. But what if I didn't do that right? I'm still running a risk. So what I'm going to do is change the color of this before I delete it. I'm going to edit the part that I think is bad. I'm going to change it to a color that I'm not using, like yellow. Hit OK. And then I'm going to do that on the other one that I also think I deleted properly. I'm going to edit it, change it to yellow. And say OK. And now when I zoom out, I should see a bunch of bad tracks driving back to the command post, which I do. And I should still see my red track in the search area. So I'm all good in my own mind. And now I can go up here, select those two yellow ones and delete them so that they will be cleaned up. Okay. So that's a pretty straightforward edit, as long as you can see clearly what's going on. I've got other problems here where someone did the search, say this black one here, and they searched up in this area, which is great. And it looks like they turned off their GPSs, which is great, but they didn't save their track and stop tracking. Then they turned it on when they got back to the command post, which is way down here. And now I've got this line across the middle of my search area, which we'll see on some of the other data too. So I'm going to go up here and do the same trick. I'm going to say left click, modify, split here, do the same thing. And then I'm going to change this to yellow. Make sure I did the right thing. And zoom out and see if that looks like a clean thing I can delete. So it is. So I'm going to delete the next yellow track that I have. And that is gone too. So I can keep doing that on these other ones. I can also come up here and say, oh, well, this really wasn't part of the search area up here. This was a foot search in here. So I'm going to kind of zoom in and see what's going on. Actually, we're just driving up the road. So I'm going to clean this up here. I'm going to go split, oops, left click, modify, split here. Same idea. And then I'm going to delete the one up here and clean that up a little bit. So you can kind of do that, different approaches, either by deleting individual points or by cutting pieces, recoloring them, and then deleting them. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to send you this exact data set so you can kind of play around with it at home if you're not an expert at this. But it does pay to have some people really well trained at this, because your maps will get really bad quickly if you don't. So that's the basic ideas. Any questions on this for people that haven't seen this before? Okay, I'm going to switch back to my other screen, hopefully. So with a little effort in this case, this working again? Yep. Okay, cool. It's got me all gun shy now. Okay, so in this particular case, I've cleaned up this entirely. I've gotten rid of all the tracks that are on the road. And now I have a much clearer presentation of what I was doing in my search area, and you know, the actual searching that was done for the day. And I've gotten rid of all the superfluous stuff best I could. So how do we manage large data sets on a big search? This is a real search in Alpine County. I'm sure many of you guys were there. It was managed by multiple teams over multiple days, including Matt and myself at different times and the same time as well. And it was even messier because it also included a couple of early days managed on Terrain Navigator Pro. And then we imported it to SARTopo. So there was all kinds of stuff going on. And this was, I think, one of the largest searches in recent history. It ended up going like 14 or 15 days with no resolution. But what I have here is a data set that goes up to around day 8, which is when I left. And I want to kind of show you what we were working with and how confusing it can be and why. And then I want to kind of talk about how you can make that look a lot better and what that does for you, if that makes sense. So let's start by doing some screenshots here and talk about using folders for visibility and for data organization, right? So, I mean, it sounds obvious enough, but it doesn't really get done. More often than not, you'll see a lot of clues dumped in clue folders. Some clues are actually put into markers folders. Lines and polygons by default captures all the tracks. A lot of searches I've been to, they don't separate the tracks by day. And if they're not labeled well, you lose that information. And so you've lost all your historical perspective about what has been searched when, because you don't have that information anymore. So it's really quite a mess. So one of the things we recommend, and we have this, I think, pretty solid best practices guide. If you don't have a copy, it'll be in your folder as well. But the idea is to use kind of standardized approaches. And one of our goals is to kind of get everyone doing things the same way, more or less, so that we have stuff that looks familiar when the next management team rolls in. So in this case, what we've done is I have markers that are important in one folder. And those are probably things like ICP and locked gates and staging and things like that. I don't have LZs on this particular map, but that would be another important folder. I've also, over time, separated my important clues from my minor clues. And those, I would say more often than not, all the clues end up mixed into a junk catch-all markers folder. And that's really confusing for a manager coming in to take over a search. So I think that's a really good practice. By far, one of the most important things to do is separate all the tracks by folders. And in this case, our assignments are in a separate folder too, because these were done in Terrain Navigator on OP4. So you can see that, breaking that into more folders that I can turn on and off by using the checkbox gives me visibility that I don't have otherwise. And using color effectively gives me clarity that I don't have otherwise here as well. So just zooming in for a second, I want to talk about symbology, and we have best practices on that as well. But I think this is what we normally see when we show up at a search. and our own team is guilty of it because you're so busy, you just don't get around to cleaning things up a lot of times. But using good symbols here and putting them in the right folders is really important. So I've got up here now, I've used the correct symbol for a clue. I've put it into the appropriate folder. We decided as a management team through Matsoning or whatever, that these are the important clues for this particular day. These are the minor clues. We've started using cameras for camera location clues because almost every search now, cameras have become important for us, even in semi-wilderness searches where you have the Puma project and other cameras like that out there, or law enforcement cameras. So give those a marker, because when you're looking at that map, instead of a red dot, you see a little camera, you know immediately what that is on the map. So that's pretty handy. And then I like to have an important markers folder, ICP, PLS, LKP, locked gate, stuff like that, that you always want to probably show on a printed map. Moving right along, one of the other mistakes that's often made, and one of the recommendations we always make, is that as you're working your way through an operational period, make sure that you color your operational period, blue, let's say for OP6, and all your assignments will be blue by default, but make sure you put all of your tracks into the OP6 folder and make sure you color those blue as well. So now you have your tracks matching your folders. It sounds obvious, but it doesn't often get done. And so make sure you do that. You can see, now I can see which tracks are associated with which operational period. And by the way, you can see a lot of these tracks still haven't been cleaned up from that particular search. The example earlier was a subset of data from this search as well. So moving right along, let's talk about importing tracks for a second. My cardinal rule is always have sticky notes in my management kit, and this is the primary use of them. When people are all pouring in at 5 o'clock and they're hungry and they want to go home, and they want to get debriefed and hit the road, they're throwing their GPSs on a desk somewhere, and you're confused about which ones are red and which ones not, and they'll put them on the right side of the desk, not the left, and that kind of stuff. So we always try to set up a very organized process where they come in on one table, and the person who's bringing it in doesn't leave until you've stuck a note on it with a team number, and then they can go debrief or get a sandwich or whatever they want to do. But they don't leave the table till that gets done. And then even if I'm backed up 30 or 40 minutes on importing tracks, I can make sure that the data is collected accurately. And I've sent all these people out working hard all day. Let's make sure we capture their data, and we know who has the track if we have questions about it, who made that track. And you can see on this search, we kind of had a mess. We had a mishmash of things. If you don't name a track, when you import it, you get this default kind of label. Then we had different protocols for different teams. So once again, when you're briefing people in the morning, tell them to put their track number in this format onto their GPS or onto their SARTopo mobile app. And then everything's going to be nice and clean, or at least you'll be a lot closer to that. So this is another best practice that I really recommend, having that table set up right. Next, this is the one I've brought up 2 or 3 times, but I just want to emphasize again, when you're printing maps and so forth, or Avenzas or briefing maps, use that random color because you get a much nicer, cleaner look at things. Finally, some other best practices that I really like to emphasize, using a standardized folder of LZs, and Matt's just presented that in nice detail. That's a really important thing, and it's really useful. Consider division and group folders. This was a suggestion as we put this document together. It came out of Mendo, and I think it's a really good one. As your operation grows, breaking assignments and breaking tracks and things into groups and operational periods might make sense as you get into a much larger type operation. When you're starting to get a lot of clutter, consider a prior assignments folder, maybe, where you put old stuff that you're not really using anymore. You can put that away if you want, declutter the map and turn it off. And finally, use standardized icons. We have recommendations for certain things. They may change a bit over time, but it's always easier if people look at a map and they're kind of used to seeing the symbols that they expect to see. So with that, I want to switch back for a minute to the actual search maps and kind of talk about how that really works in operation, in reality here. So 1 second. There we go. Okay, we should be back on my map. I'm going to switch over now to the real search data that we had after cleaning it up first round on this search, which was admittedly a gigantic search with tons and tons of people over a long period of time. So you can see here, we had assignments with one nomenclature here for the first few days, and those were done in Terrain Navigator Pro. And then we had some data that came in, but it turns out this one's empty because we didn't have any markers in there. Then we have tracks from this first OP, but they weren't defined and associated with the OP. So we lost that history. And then we had one folder with all kinds of markers, game cams and stuff. So that was kind of not the best practice now. Admittedly, this was 5 or 6 years ago too. And then here's our track folder, lines and polygons. You can see it's just not useful. I don't know who any of these people are, what teams these were. Oh, there's one, Marin 35. So, but there's no standard practice for naming that track there. I assume that's Alpine County Sheriff, so I know I could find them maybe. And then later on in the search, we started kind of recording some stuff with track numbers and all. And I actually took this data and spent a lot of time trying to clean it up and make it presentable. But one of the problems I have now is if I look at this, I zoom out a little bit, and let me just turn off the assignments, just look at tracks for a second. If I turn off all this other data, let's see, assignments. So now I've got a bunch of tracks here, but I can't tell which day they are because there's no standardized colors here. They're all mixed together between days. And I don't have any, I know that the sheriff ones are green on a certain day. And so it's very confusing. I actually went back and looked at timestamps and pieced this all together and kind of reconstructed it. Similarly, my assignments, if I turn off my tracks, my assignments are kind of hard to follow, but they're actually there. So that's good. And then I turn on these ones that were built in the other system, and I can kind of see them there, and they kind of overlap in certain cases. So, but we dealt with that okay. And then we have gaps here, which of course there's a drainage, might have been one of our priority assignments, but we didn't get that done in time. So anyway, this is very difficult to try to figure out what's been done. And when I put where am I attacking this search tomorrow? And how can I see what was done and when? And where are my important clues? I don't know. Is track 2 an important clue? It's just a red dot on the map. I don't know what that means. Is there a clue log? I don't know. So I'm losing a lot of information here. So with a lot of work and effort, you can kind of get to this point, or if you have someone keeping on top of this as you go along. So the first thing we did is a best practice of making sure that the track colors match the operational period colors. And then, as I mentioned, I've moved my important clues into one folder, my minor clues into another. And if I just kind of want to see like, okay, well, what do we know in the clue department? I'm going to turn everything else off for a second. And I'm going to kind of eyeball what we know in terms of clues, if anything. I'm going to turn off my operational periods down here. I'm like, okay, well, there's the PLS. I have a track out here. And let me just turn on the major clues first. And let's talk about this. I have a footprint out here. I've got a canine alert here. Water interest here, which turned out we believe to be burying ashes in the lake. And then I have a possible voice call out here. So very quickly, I can talk about those with the new management teams and so forth. And then I can talk about the minor clues that came in, whether we think they're important or not. And then I can kind of go in and say, well, on day 1, well, on the early days, we don't know which day, but this is the stuff that was done initially. And then as we worked our way through it, we kind of added some drainages around the area. And then when we came into the 3rd and 4th day, we really ramped up the effort, and these are the areas we covered. And then the last couple of days, this is what we've done. And they're all in the right colors now too. And I can kind of see how my search has progressed by color as well. And I can overlay any of those. And if I want to say, okay, we're talking about OP 9 or 10 now, I'm going to turn off this old stuff for right now. And I'm going to say, well, let's just talk about what we did today in OP 8, and as opposed to what we were trying to achieve in OP 8. So I can easily turn on just OP 8 assignments, OP 8 tracks. It tells a story of which segments were covered well and which weren't. And I can see like, okay, I never even got to these. Are these my next highest priorities? Do I need to hit these again? Were they too steep? Let's look at the debriefs. All those kinds of questions can be answered pretty quickly if your data is organized. And so that's kind of the idea there. And it's a lot of work to get it right. And you really need, you want one of your whiz people in plans staying on top of this. And as the data comes in, cleaning it up as you go. And then it doesn't become an unwieldy mess that you have to reverse engineer and figure out where all the information came from. And so one of our goals in this whole class and process is to kind of have, you know, a set of best practices and rules that we kind of all recognize when we go to a new search. And when we hand off to a new team on our 2-hour overlap, we have a pretty good idea of what's been done and how it's all documented. Any questions on any of that? Some of it maybe appear to be pretty straightforward, but it does not get done all that often, and it's getting a lot better as time goes on for sure. The other thing I wanted to mention just briefly before we leave this is labels. When you get a search like this, even if your labels are nice and short, like they are now for the most part, the map can get very cluttered. Another little trick, if you don't remember it, is if you're kind of getting performance issues and way too much stuff on the map, you can always go up here and turn off the labels completely. If you just want to kind of look at tracks and slope shading or something like that, and it makes it a little cleaner yet again. And then you can turn things back on as you need it, or you can do it by folder as well, and have some labels turned on, like important things, and other labels like track names turned off, for instance. So lots of flexibility there because you really need it when you get into these large searches. So that, I think, is all I had here. Let me just check my slides. Just one final comment. I won't go back to the PowerPoint, but essentially when you're all done with this and during intermediate steps along the way, I like to export a JSON archive regularly, just in case the worst happens and someone deletes the map by accident or something, and you can't find Matt to restore it or whatever. So I just dump it into my temporary